Shorten sleeve on long sleeves by moving placket. Male shirts only. Measure how much the sleeve needs to be shortened. Carefully rip the cuff from the sleeve and remove the loose threads. Carefully remove the buttons and placket pieces from sleeve. Do one sleeve at a time to keep your pieces together. Remove loose threads from around the opening and placket too. Measure the length of the split opening from the raw edge to where the cut stops. Write down the measurement. Mark the amount with chalk where to shorten the sleeve, beginning from the original stitch line. The original seam line would be marked by the needle holes, which should be 1/4 inch. Cut off excess fabric from the bottom of the sleeve. The opening needs to be extended. Mark the top opening with chalk or a dissolving pen, the amount you wrote down, but do not cut too high. Stay at least 1/2 inch from placket end. From that point, mark with chalk lightly where the V-notch ends on each side, so you can use this as a guide, knowing where the vent ends. With scissors, clip out the top, creating a V shape no more than 3/8 inch above the slit, while making sure you're keeping within the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Start with the underside of the placket and use the under placket to add onto the cut edge on the underside or back section of the sleeve. Depending on the skill level, edge stitch the placket by catching both sides as you would sew bias tape to an unfinished edge. The finished seam should be right side up. If you're not skilled with this, sew one side first, then fold the placket in half, and then fold the free edge in with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Begin stitching by making sure the placket covers the visible stitches. You should have at least 1/2 inch extension left at top of the placket opening. The over placket will be longer and wider than the under placket. You want to stitch the over placket the same way as you did with the under placket by sewing the placket in one procedure or sewing each seam at a time. Remember though, the first seam will be sewn to the wider side of the sleeve and the first seam that you finish will be faced up. Begin stitching from the sleeve hem and sewing 1/2 inch past the V mark, making sure to catch that corner. You do not want any raw edges to show. Join the V to the top of the small strip that is not sewn, joining so they are facing the right side of the fabric. This will be covered with the wide facing. The underside should be clean with no seams showing. The outer placket is now ready to be folded into a peak or to form a doghouse shape. Fold one side of the top of the placket under at an approximate 45-degree angle. Fold the other side under the first fold, making sure each side is even. After the second fold, your placket peak is formed. Pin or base peak in place once you're satisfied with its form. Hopefully, the upper placket peak maintained its shape when you rip the original seams from the sleeve. Position your needle onto the placket edge overlapping the stitched side, starting at the chalk mark. Start sewing the doghouse edge stitching up to the first corner point, pivot, stitch to the top of the peak, pivot, and stitch to the final corner. Then pivot again, and stitch until you reach the next marked chalk line. Then pivot to stitch straight across the placket through all the layers until you meet the point where you started stitching, then pivot again to overlap the stitching to secure. Before applying the cuff, make sure everything is even and lying flat. Sew the cuff on, making sure both the placket edges are even with the cuff ends. Resew buttons back onto the under placket. Press sleeves and shirt when completed.